Hello everyone. Before we dive into tonight's accounts, I have a small request. If you find yourself looking over your shoulder or feeling that chill down your spine while listening, please hit the like button and subscribe. It's the best way to support the channel and ensures that these stories keep coming your way. I also want to hear from you. Drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from and exactly what time it is for you. October in western North Carolina does something to the light that I've never seen anywhere else. The sky goes this flat, heavy gray that sits low over the ridge lines, and the color just drains out of everything. The leaves, the water, the rocks. It all turns the same shade of dull. Some people find that depressing. I've always liked it. The crowds are gone by then. The summer fishermen are back home, and you can have a stretch of river entirely to yourself for hours without seeing another soul. I'd been making the drive out to the Chattooga every October for going on 12 years by then. Same stretch every time. You have to earn it a little. There's a ridge trail about 2 miles in before you even get down to the water, and the descent is steep enough that your knees know about it the next morning. But once you're down there, it's worth it. The river runs narrow and cold through that section, hemmed in by rhododendron on both banks, and the fishing is as good as anything I've found in 30 years of doing this. That particular morning I'd gotten on the water around 7. Overcast, no wind, temperature somewhere in the low 40s. The kind of morning where your hands go stiff on the rod if you stop moving for too long. I'd been working upstream for about an hour, not covering ground quickly, just moving a few steps between casts and paying attention to the water. The fishing had been slow, not dead, just slow. A few small fish early, and then nothing, which is normal enough for October, when the water temperature drops and the fish get lethargic and particular about what they'll eat. I wasn't thinking about much. That's the thing about fly fishing that I've never been able to properly explain to people who don't do it. When it's going well, there's nothing in your head. You're just watching the drift and mending the line and reading the water, and that's the whole world for a while. Even when it's slow, like it was that morning, there's still enough to pay attention to that everything else just goes quiet. The first thing I noticed was the dog. Not the man, the dog. A collie coming along the far bank at the edge of the rhododendron, moving slowly, head down. I watched it for a second, thinking it was alone, a farm dog that had wandered down from somewhere up on the ridge. They do that sometimes, but then I saw the man behind it, moving through the gap in the undergrowth where the bank widened slightly, and I figured it was just someone out for an early walk with his dog. He came around to my side of the bank at a shallow crossing, maybe 30 yards downstream, and started making his way toward me along the gravel. Slowly. The kind of slow that told you he was old before you could see his face clearly. The dog matched his pace exactly, right at his side, head still down. I didn't think anything of it at first. You see people on the river, sometimes even on the quiet stretches. Hikers, mostly. Occasionally, someone who's made the same walk in that I had. I went back to fishing and let them come. What I noticed next, without really registering it as strange yet, was the way he was dressed. Old coat, torn at one pocket, hanging wrong on his frame like it was a size too large. Underneath it you could see layers, the collar of a shirt, the edge of a sweater, the kind of bundling you see on someone who doesn't have one warm thing, so they wear several less warm things instead. Old wool trousers, dress shoes, actual dress shoes, the leather darkened up past the ankle from the wet grass and the river mud, and a hat, an old flat cap, pulled low enough that his face was mostly shadow. None of that seemed alarming, just odd. The Appalachian backcountry has always had people living in and around it who exist a little outside of whatever the rest of the world is doing. I've encountered stranger things than an old man dressed for church walking a river trail in October. He came up beside me and stopped. The dog stopped too. Same low head, same stillness. I could see now that the dog's coat was in bad shape. Patches along the back and flanks where the fur had come away entirely, the skin beneath pale and dry. Old injury or old illness, hard to say. The dog didn't sniff the bank, didn't show any interest in the water or in me, just stood there. The man started talking. His voice was low and raspy, the kind of voice that comes from a lot of years and a lot of weather. He was looking down at the ground when he spoke, not at me, which made it harder to hear him clearly. And I listened for a moment, trying to follow what he was saying, and I couldn't. Not because of the rasp or the volume. I could hear the words fine. I just couldn't understand them. I stood there genuinely trying to identify what language I was hearing, and I couldn't get there. It wasn't anything I recognized. It had a cadence to it, a rhythm, the way speech has when someone is telling you something rather than just making noise. Like he was recounting something. A long, low, steady recounting in a language I had never heard in my life. I looked at him for a moment and then looked back at the water. I made a cast. He kept talking. I made another cast. He didn't stop, didn't acknowledge that I wasn't responding. Just continued in that low, raspy voice with his head down and the dog standing motionless beside him. After a minute or two, I started to step upstream, the way you do when you're done with a situation without wanting to make a thing of it. Just a slow, natural movement upriver. He lifted his head. I don't know how long I stood there after that. It didn't feel long. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been longer. I was standing in about 1.5 feet of cold moving water, and I was not thinking about the cold or the current or the rod in my hand or anything except what I was looking at. His eyes were black. I don't mean dark. I don't mean shadowed by the hat brim. I mean black from edge to edge. No iris, no white, no variation of any kind. The kind of black that doesn't reflect light the way eyes reflect light. Just flat and black and completely still, looking at me. His face in that moment was not the face I had been seeing for the past few minutes. It was not the face of the old man who had walked up the gravel bank with his dog. I recognized what I was looking at, and I am not going to go further into that part of it because it is not something I've been able to talk about cleanly even now, years later. I'll just say that it was a face I had last seen in a hospital room earlier that year. A face I had been present with at the very end, wearing the expression of someone at rest. He held my eyes for a moment. Then his head went back down and he turned and walked downstream with the dog. I didn't move. I stood in the river and I watched them go. The gravel bank downstream was straight and open for a long way before it bent out of sight, and I watched them walking, and then I made one cast. I couldn't tell you why, the muscle memory just took over. And when I looked up again, maybe 40-50 seconds later, the bank was empty. Not around the bend, not shrinking in the distance. Empty. The two of them were simply gone from an open stretch of bank in less time than it takes to make a single cast and mend the line. I waded out and sat on a rock for a while. I've fished a lot of water in the years since that morning. I haven't been back to that stretch of the Chattooga. I keep thinking I will, I haven't yet. There's a stretch of the New River in Virginia, deep in the gorge section where the water slows down and widens and gets this dark, heavy quality that honestly doesn't even look like the same river you see from the road. From up top, it's just another pretty Appalachian river. Fine, whatever. But once the gorge closes in around you and the walls come up on both sides and the light stops reaching the bottom, it becomes something else entirely. The water moves different. The sound changes. Even the air feels like it belongs to the gorge and not to whatever season is happening up above. New moon, July, last 2 hours of the evening. The kind of conditions that line up maybe a handful of times a season, and when they do, you just go. I drove almost 2 hours to get there. Didn't think twice about it. You pack your gear the night before. You're on the road before most people have eaten dinner, and you don't second guess any of it, because that's just what this is when you actually care about it. The access trail drops into the gorge from a pull-off on a forest road. 15 minutes down, steep enough that your knees remind you about it on the way back up. I hit the water around 9, maybe 9:15, and look, it was dark. Not foggy, not that soft, overcast dim you sometimes get on summer nights. Just completely, totally, aggressively black. My headlamp felt almost useless down there, lit up maybe 10 feet of bank, and then just stopped, like the dark was pushing back against it. The river I heard before I saw it. That low, constant sound filling the whole gorge from wall to wall. I figured there'd be at least 1 or 2 other guys down there. New moon, a summer evening, solid stretch of water. Usually someone else has had the same idea, and you just spread out and mind your own business. But when I got to the bank, it was completely empty. Nobody, just me. I probably should have sat with that a little longer than I did. Instead, I rigged up, waded in, and started casting. Got into the rhythm quick. Cast, retrieve, a few steps, cast again. The dark stopped bothering me after a few minutes the way it always does once you're actually fishing. You stop thinking about what you can't see, and you just focus on what you can feel through the line. 20 minutes in, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I know how that sounds. But that's what it was. Not the current bumping against my waders, not the rod shifting, not my jacket catching the wind. A hand, placed on my shoulder from behind. Is solid and deliberate. The specific, unmistakable weight of a person standing behind you with their hand on your shoulder. I spun around and put the headlamp up. Empty bank, completely empty. Trail visible in the beam, nothing on it, nothing moving, nothing between me and the tree line. I stood there scanning for probably 15 seconds. The gorge was dead quiet except for the river. Okay, fine. I turned back around and kept fishing. Told myself it was the current or my imagination or whatever. I've been fishing alone at night for 20 years. And your brain does things to you in the dark sometimes. That's just the reality of it. I let the rational explanation do its job and went back to casting. 5 minutes later, same shoulder, same pressure, same empty bank when I turned around. And then a third time, barely 3 minutes after the second. And this one was different. The first time felt like someone tapping you to get your attention. The second felt like someone who didn't appreciate being ignored. But the third time felt like something leaning, like actual weight shifting toward you from behind, close enough that you feel your own balance adjust slightly in response. I turned around and saw the same empty bank for the third time, and I just stood there in the water for a second. Then I reeled up. not ashamed of it, not even a little. I reeled up, broke my rod down, waded out, and walked up that trail back to the forest road. Didn't run, I want to be clear about that, I didn't run. But I moved with the kind of focus that doesn't leave room for looking around too much. Got to my truck, got in, started the engine and turned the heater on full, even though it was July, because I had a cold sitting in my chest that had absolutely nothing to do with the water temperature. Just sat there with the windows fogging up, waiting for it to leave my body. Took hours, genuinely took hours. I didn't tell anyone about it for almost a month because every time I started to bring it up, I got 2 sentences in and just trailed off. Because on paper, it's nothing, right? A feeling on your shoulder, an empty bank. That's the whole story. But you try standing alone in a gorge at 9 o'clock on a new moon with 2 hours of dark water in front of you and no one else for miles. And then tell me how small a hand on your shoulder feels when you turn around and there's nothing there. And then feels bigger the second time. And bigger again the third. Here's the thing that stuck with me though. That gorge section of the New River. People in those counties have been fishing it for generations. Old families. The kind of deep-rooted Appalachian families who've worked that water going back further than anyone can track. Some of those pools have names that don't show up on any map. Names that got passed down quietly, the way things get passed down in mountain communities that have been in the same place for a very long time and have learned which things to talk about and which things to just leave alone. After that night, I asked around a little. Not aggressively, just mentioned the spot to a guy I know who grew up in that county and has fished the gorge his whole life. Then he said something about that particular bend in the bank having a history that most people who fish there don't know about before they go in. He didn't elaborate. I didn't push. But I've thought about it a lot since then. About that empty bank. About 3 attempts to get my attention, each one less polite than the last. About driving 2 hours to stand in a spot that somebody, or something, had already decided was spoken for that night. And me just wading in anyway, like I owned the place. There is a stretch of the Elk River in West Virginia that most people drive past without knowing it's there. No signage, no designated access point, just a pull-off on a county road where the gravel shoulder widens slightly and a gap in the tree line hints at something beyond it. I found it by accident 3 years ago and kept it to myself the way you keep anything worth keeping. The walk-in is about 10 minutes through second growth forest. Nothing technical, just enough to discourage people who aren't committed. The river comes up on you suddenly. You're pushing through the last of the undergrowth, and then the trees open and the water is right there, loud and close, running over a wide limestone shelf before dropping into a long, deep pool that curves around a bend to the left. On the right side of the pool, jutting out from the bank at a low angle over the water, there is a flat-topped boulder about the size of a kitchen table. Perfect casting position. Perfect view of the whole pool. The first time I found it, I stood on that rock for a minute before I even rigged up, just looking. I'd been going back to that spot every few weeks through the season. Never seen another person there. Not once. I got there before first light on a Thursday morning in early September. Parked at the pull-off, no other vehicles. Walked in through the trees with my headlamp on. The forest was still doing that late summer thing where the nights have started to cool, but the days haven't caught up yet, and the air in the tree line was cold enough that I could see my breath in the headlamp beam. I came out of the trees and stopped. There was someone on the rock. At least that's what I thought for a moment. A shape on the boulder dark against the slightly lighter surface of the water beyond it. I stood at the tree line and watched it for a few seconds before the shape resolved into what it actually was. A bag. A large, clear polythene bag sitting on the right edge of the rock with something inside it. I walked over. 2 fish inside the bag. Trout, both of them, good-sized. One maybe 14 inches, the other a little larger. The bag was tied at the top and sitting upright. I crouched down and looked at them in the headlamp beam, and the droplets were still running down the inside of the polythene. The fish were wet and bright, their color still vivid, the way fish look in the first few minutes after they come out of the water before anything starts to go. Someone had been on this rock very recently. I stood up and looked both ways along the bank. The tree line on the far side of the river was dark and unreadable. The bank upstream and downstream on my side was empty as far as the headlamp reached. I listened. The river, the wind in the upper branches, nothing else. I set up on the rock and started fishing. I want to be straightforward about the timeline because it matters. I fished that pool for just over 3 hours. In that time, I worked the entire pool systematically, upstream and down, covering every piece of fishable water within casting range of that boulder. The light came up slowly, the gray pre-dawn giving way to the flat white of an overcast September morning. And as the visibility improved, I could see both banks clearly and the trail I'd walked in on and the bend in the river downstream. Nobody came. An hour in, I looked at the bag again. Still sitting where I'd found it, right edge of the rock, tied at the top. The condensation on the inside had started to run down in streaks, but the fish inside still looked fresh. 2 hours in, I looked again. The bag had not moved. At some point in the 3rd hour, I became aware that I was checking it more frequently than made any sense. Every few casts, I was glancing over at it. Not because anything had changed, because nothing had. 3 hours is a long time to leave freshly caught fish sitting on a rock in the open air. Long enough that anyone who'd left them there had either forgotten them, which didn't make sense, or had walked away from this spot with no intention of coming back for them, which made less. I packed up around 9 in the morning. Before I left, I looked at the bag one more time. The fish inside had gone pale, and still the way fish do when they've been dead for a few hours. The droplets on the inside of the polythene had dried to faint mineral streaks. I left the bag where it was and walked back through the trees to the road. My car was still the only one at the pull-off. I've been back to that spot 4 times since that morning. The bag was gone on my next visit, which I expected. The rock was just a rock again. I still fish there. It's still the best pool on that stretch of river. But I always get there before first light now, and the first thing I do when I come out of the trees is look at that boulder.